Allison had questions I haven't made too either about exclusive listings and non-exclusive listings. I was hoping just to answer her question in the public. If she pops on, we're gonna talk about that one.
I'm here. I just don't know how to unmute.
Okay, good. So tell me, so Allison had a question, and I don't really know these specifics. She's going to give it to us about non-exclusive listings versus exclusive listings. Of course, a typical house has an exclusive listing, but it is very common. I think we probably all get them from Charlie Kriegel or whatever. He's got properties in Tulum, and they're being marketed by someone in Tulum, someone in Florida, someone in California, and someone in Houston and wherever else. So he has a non-exclusive listing agreement to sell unit 205, and he has that non-exclusive right to list that unit until that unit gets under contract, and then his listing goes away. David Diamond's had multiple rental units in high rises. I don't remember the exact one, Market Square or something, and their on-site people are trying to rent it, and David Diamond lists it on the MLS. He's not the only one. I'm just giving an example to list unit 1704 in Market Square, and if it's available, great. David and the co-oping agent get paid, and if it's not available when someone makes an application, David doesn't get shit. So we have had an example. Those are examples where we have non-exclusive listings. So Allison, that was your background to tell me what this scenario is.
Well, it's all a moot point, which is why I didn't chase you down yesterday.
Okay, good.
What happened was what I told him was probably going to happen, but a friend has a house in a gated community, and his neighbor has had designs on his house for a while, and they're not ready to sell, but this neighbor just came up the other day and said, I want to put in a cash offer for your house. And Steve said, okay, but don't lowball me. And, you know, Steve's savvy, he knows what he's doing. And the guy, Steve just said, can you represent me for a reduced fee if I already have a contract and a buyer? And so that's what I was calling you about. But in the meantime, the neighbor came forward Sunday night with an offer that Steve said was offensive. And I had told him, I said, when a neighbor approaches you like that, they're typically not willing to pay market.
That's right. Neighbors never want to pay what the market will pay. So, I mean, you know, on the, I've got a buyer, what will you do for me? Can you shepherd me through the process sort of thing? And it's not like we don't all get asked to do that. The reality of it is, that's nothing but liability to me. There's just hardly any amount of fee that can make it work, you know? So who are we, you know, so we're licensed, we have to have a license. I'm the broker, I'm responsible no matter for whatever you do in real estate, I'm responsible for your actions. You're not gonna get sued, I'm gonna get sued. And often the best answer is just no. Because if you start doing it for your next door neighbor for, you know, $500 or $1,000 or $1 or something. I mean, often it's better off just, I mean, no, something's always going to go wrong. It's hard to justify why, if I list my good friend Chuck Henry's house and I sell it the next day for 2.2 million and I'm making 6% and that's $120,000. Why would I charge Chuck $120,000 and my next door neighbor $500? It just, we have more liability than you would think in those scenarios. I mean, it just really is. Really, the other party's rarely represented, which gets us in trouble with the insurance company, and then they don't want to cover us, which then leaves us open to tremendous liability. We all could be working for Greenwood King then, you know, if I get sued and I don't have insurance and it's $50 million, we're not going to be able to make it. So, I mean, usually those deals, but I do want to be clear, because we need to be able to say, all fees are negotiable. I don't like to negotiate because I don't think I like it to go up, not down, you know, but we do have to be willing to do some things in 2021, because I don't want to get sued for saying, you know, we're not flexible. But this is what we charge a buyer and this is what we charge a seller, and we charge them all because we make it up with volume. Otherwise, you would charge the $2 million house less than you would charge the $500,000 house, because you're making more on the $2 million house than you are the 500. The only way we we cannot be in business. We would not have an office, Sandra, Mary Ann, or anyone if we only sold $500,000 houses. Our model doesn't work that way. You have to sell some $3 million houses and some $500,000 houses. You get the $3 million houses because you have 120 listings, most of which are $500,000. But our model would not work if we only charge 3% to 500,000 and 1% to 3 million. It's the cumulative thing of how it works. And believe me, every industry is the same damn way. JJ Watt makes $28 million at the Arizona Cardinals because the center makes $500,000. JJ Watt won't be able to play unless the center snaps the ball, but the center's just not as popular as JJ Watt. He can command that price, and Joe Smith, the center, cannot, or the left tackle or the punter. They're not as valuable. It's a commodity, and that's, I mean, I don't want to get off center, but that's how that works. But glad that issue went away, Allison. So we don't really, but there are non-exclusive listings. That was really where I was going. And what you really wanted is a listing agreement with an exclusion of the neighbor, and the neighbor and he just work that shit out themselves, and we ain't involved. And if the neighbor buys it, fine, we got nothing. Meanwhile, you go market it to the world for X, and with the commission built in to pay everyone. That's the easier way around that. Just say, you guys don't need me, I'll just go over there and do it. But if you do it and you start doing it for a reduced fee, and it's who you represent, it's inspections, it's surveys, it's title work, it's legal work, it's negotiations, it's showings, there's a lot more involved with these sort of things than just showing a house. Keep in mind, we don't really get paid to show a house. It has nothing to do with what our value perception is. Our value perception is hundreds of other things. So let's focus on that, because you're always going to get the chance to say, I found the house myself. Would you do it for 1%? If you cannot answer that question, get out of real estate. If you cannot answer that question, great. If you don't practice with your spouse and your daughter and your fellow realtor, get ready to answer that question every day. I found the house myself. Will you do it for 1%? Will you kick me back 1%? Well, if you answer the question, practice the question, because you're going to get asked it. And when you stumble, you're going to look like you're not worth 9%, which is what you're worth. So practice those sort of things if you could. Okay, we're going to move on to something, because I just love flooding and I just can't get out of the flood world. We're going to talk again about, just because I think it is the biggest issue in Houston, Texas in the next decade. Okay, and you've got to be there again. You need to practice. These sort of things. Cynthia's client is interested in 1914 Dewberry. 1914 Dewberry is a new construction, and you can see that it is lovely house, and it's raised up a couple of steps. Okay. And 1914 Dewberry is in the 100-year floodplain. So they have a survey that says it's in the 100-year floodplain, and then they have an elevation certificate. And if we look at this elevation certificate, please, all of you, if you can't explain an elevation certificate, please stop what you're doing until you can explain an elevation certificate, because you're going to get the chance to explain elevation certificates the rest of the decade. You've got to be able to do this. So first thing you got to find is just, what is this base flood elevation? It's 62 and a half feet. If the water rises from the Gulf of Mexico and you measured the 100-year flood, where would the water be at? And it would be 62 and a half feet from the Gulf of Mexico. Okay. But this number is the current 100-year floodplain. Okay. It's the current one today. This house, so now we're going to talk about, that's just the floodplain in general. If there's no house there, that's the base flood elevation. If the house is 30 feet up in the air, that's the base flood elevation. That has nothing to do with the house. That's just the base flood elevation. And then here's the house. The bottom of the first floor of this house, which includes all this other shit, is 61.7, which is really the top of the slab of the garage. The garage is at 61 and a half. Garages, so long as they have these air vents open all alongside, are going to be below the base flood elevation in 90% of the instances, so that's fine. This house is at 65. So the first floor, so when you go up these steps of the house, and you go from the garage, you pop, you go up to the steps here, it's evident that the house is at 65, which is higher than 62.6, 2 feet above the base flood elevation right this second, okay? But that information is all soon going to be totally obsolete, okay? It's not going to matter soon because we're going to assume that the 100-year floodplain is the 25-year floodplain and the 500 is going to be the 100. So the city and the county regulate now across the entire county, across every entity, across the city of Spring Valley, across the city of West University Place, across the city of Bel Air. The county now is regulating these things. And they're telling you, we go to 1914 Dewberry over here. These are all good. Okay. And here's 1914 Dewberry. You can tell it's in the current 100, but we know the 100 is going to get much bigger here. We're going to use new numbers. The 100 is going to get bigger. And you click over here, and this is just roughly telling you, okay, when we remeasure using Atlas 14, the 100, instead of being at 62, is going to be at 65.21, okay? So very soon, this house is going to be below the base flood elevation. And the current building code in the city of Houston, in Harris County, if it burned down, would have to be at 65.2 plus 2 more feet. It would have to be at 67.2 if it burned down. If the city of Houston is telling you that it needs to be at 67.2, that's probably a pretty good indication that that's what the flood insurance number is going to be, because the city's obligated by FEMA to get houses out of harm's way and make them where we can afford them. So we're not there yet, but the city code is there. That house does not meet the current building code for the city of Houston, which is 67.5, which when it all kicks in, that house is going to be significantly below the base flood elevation, and its current insurance, which might be $497, because technically today it's above the base flood elevation, is very soon not going to be above the base flood elevation. Do we all know how to figure this out? Do we all know how to get an elevation certificate, see what it is today? This number's obsolete. This is why I keep telling you, you could care less about the 100-year base flood elevation. You could care less because it's going to be obsolete. The number will make no difference here very soon. You only care about the 500-year base flood elevation. The city and the county regulate the 100 and the 500 exactly the same as if they are now. The 500 is the 100. So you need the 500-year base flood elevation. Yes.
What about if the house is right now in the 500?
The 500 and the 100 for regulatory purposes are the exact same, because the 500 is the anticipated new 100. The 100 is going to be the 25-year floodplain. So the 500, the city and the county regulate the 500. Everything that's in the 500, they, for regulatory purposes, assume it is the 100. Okay, so we treat the 500 the same as the 100. They regulate in the 500, and you would have to build to the 500 in the 500-year floodplain. You have to build to the 500-year base flood elevation plus 2, not the 100 base flood elevation, the 500. So, and remember, half of the area that's not even currently identified is going to be identified, because more than 60% of the houses were not on a street that had ever been mapped. Think of it that way. When we map these areas that we've never mapped before, you're going to add a hell of a lot more houses to some floodplain. Well, you're going to add the geography. The houses themselves may be higher. Okay, so let's take my own house. Okay, so I am building a house. I'm building a house in the 100-year floodplain. I got to get to this. So here's my house. I'm building a house, and I'm gonna start a house over here. So we go to what it is that I'm building. Now there ain't nothing there. Okay, there's nothing there. I've torn everything down or whatever. One second, I'm not as fast at this stuff as you are. But to build, to build anywhere in the 100 or the 500 in the city of Houston, I have to have an elevation certificate. To even get a permit somewhere, I have to get an elevation certificate. So here's my raw piece of land over here at 2714 Bayland, and it's telling me the base flood elevation, which is the 100, is 38.1. Okay, so you go over to Walter P. Moore. So remember 38.1, 2714 Morrison. Do this basically anywhere. All right, so in the 500, the world assumes the 500 is going to be the 100. Okay, so for regulatory purposes, the 500 is the 100. So I've got to now consider that to be the 100. I'm not as good at this. One second. So here's my little jewel. Sorry, it is slow sometimes, but I knew this was going to be slow the minute that I wanted something. One second, it will do it. It's just a function of time here to do it. So we have it will do it. You just gotta.
There you go.
This is fine. So the old 100 is 38.14. And I know that because that's what it said on my elevation certificate. This is measuring the old, what is the current, but it's really, we know that to be obsolete. The new number is going to be 42.8. So instead of 38, which used to be before the rule 38 plus 1, now we're to 42.8 plus 2. Okay. So this is the number I care about. 42.8 plus 2 is 44.8. So we go to my little house over here. We say, okay, Bill, what are you doing? And I go and I say, you know what I'm doing? I'm building a house. And what am I building that house to? I'm building it to a higher standard. And you would go and you would look at my little deal, and I'm gotta go find it, but maybe it's back in the other one. So the house that I'm building, I'm going to build it 45.5. I'm required to build it 44.5. And you know what I'm doing? I'm being smarter than that because I don't want to even cut it so close that I would be 1 inch too close to there. The house I'm building is going to exceed that number. The minimum 42.8 plus 2 feet was 44.8. I'm building at 45.5 because I'm not stupid. And so these other people that have been cutting it too close are going to pay astronomically high insurance rates because they're soon going to be 1, 2, 3, or 4 feet below the base flood elevation. That Dewberry house is going to be 5 feet below the base flood elevation when the new maps come out and the new insurance kicks in, and it isn't going to be pretty for that Dewberry person. So they're telling you, oh, out of the floodplain, flood insurance, $497. Don't pay attention to any of that. Know how to calculate what the new situation is going to be. And building in the floodplain is not a problem. I'm building in the floodplain. I don't have a problem building in the floodplain. You're just going to have to build higher in order so that you can afford the flood insurance. Okay? Questions about this? Do we know how to do this? Anyone have a question?
So
Hey, Bill, this is Dave. Hey, real quick, I think you've answered this before, but if we're helping a client purchase a house,
yep,
and they don't have an elevation certificate,
get in.
Do we just write in special provisions that based on the
Any buyer
Elevation.
can get an elevation certificate. You don't have to have the permission to it, but yes, I would get an elevation certificate for most homes. Now, if you're clearly way outside the 100 and the 500 and clearly no houses have ever flooded around there, you know, maybe you would want to save the money, but I still think everyone's going to want flood insurance, whether they're inside the floodplain or outside the floodplain, especially since 60% of the floods are outside the floodplain.
I have a question.
In order to get a good insurance rate, you're going to need to know it. And it's just so cheap to get the elevation certificate when you're already getting a survey.
I have a question.
Yep.
So if your house is going to be 45.5 feet above, you know, that's the level.
The 500-year base was,
How tall is your house going to be off the ground?
my house is going to be 2 feet off the ground, which is 3 feet less than my Balin house was. My lot is already high enough. My basic lot, you could tell, was pretty high. So my house is not going to look like Meyerland or anything. It's going to look about like the one across the street. We're not talking about the house having to be that high off the ground. You're talking about it being higher than the base flood elevation. And you can drive Morrison from the bayou and see you're consistently getting higher. You can stand on the street at Morrison and see, yes, the curb is 6 inches off the street, and my lot is a good foot or two in the middle of that lot than the curb. It's plenty high, so that the slab is no more than 2 feet up.
Bill, I think this new laws is going to affect the resale houses more
Sure
than
it
it's going
is.
to be for the new ones. Now,
Well, let's answer that question, because that's not absolutely true. Because built into the federal law, the maximum increase of an existing homeowner's flood policy is going to be capped at 18%. So if you're whatever it is, it's not going to go from $1,000 to $12,000.
okay,
Where
so
it will go to $12,000 with no grandfathering is you buy a house that's paying $1,000 and you buy it, you might get to pay $12,000. So it's not just flooding the market, it's the devaluation of the houses when they go to sell. See what
and
I'm
also
saying?
because the city is not doing, I mean, they also have to do their part trying to reduce the flooding, not just
And
putting
we are,
everything else in
but
the flood
want to be
zone.
clear there. We're
Yeah.
doing about $20 billion of a $100 billion problem. And it takes about 10 years to spend $20 billion. So you don't do any of it fast, and that doesn't solve the problem. It's the down payment. You make your down payment on your house of 20%, you still got to pay the other 80%, right? Or they take it away from you. So it is a good first start, but these projects take a very long time. There's no way to flood Studewood at 10th Street until I fix the drain at the bayou. I got to go from the bayou all the way up to 10th Street, and then I got to go all the way up to North Main, and I got to go all the way up to 610 and Independence Heights in order to solve the problem. And I got to go west over at TC Jester, and I got to go east to I-45. If I just put in a big drain at 10th and Studewood, there ain't nowhere for the water to go.
Right.
So
that's
to
why
solve the
I
problem
think-
is not an easy problem. You can't do
right.
it.
It's not an easy fix, and it's
Not an
also
easy fix.
Bill, and it also shouldn't be one fix fit all, because I think if you put all the houses in flood zone, it's going to devaluate the property. People are not going to want to buy resale homes, but if the house doesn't flood anymore because the city is doing their job, I think that should be a factor in the price of the insurance.
Well, it is a factor, and let's back up just because I'm sometimes sensitive. The city is not responsible for flooding by any means. The county's responsible by state law and the creation of the Harris County Flood Control District. The city has very little responsibility of flooding. They have
Let's call it the government.
the government in general. Yes. But I am your typical American and typical Texan. We have a very expensive problem, and I don't want to give them any more money. I don't want to pay higher taxes. I don't want to pay for a lot of these things. And you know what I don't want to pay for? Independence Heights and Sugar Land. and Cinco Ranch and Kingwood. I want to pay for 10th and Studewood. I want to pay for 2714 Morrison, but I don't, and this is everyone else. Nobody wants to pay for everyone else's problem. They only want to pay for their problem. And the guy in River Oaks paying $50,000 in taxes. The guy in Independence Heights is paying $5,000 in taxes, but we need $1 billion. It's a complicated topic. I just want to be clear. But there are many projects that will get houses out of harm's way and will lower the base flood elevation. You can do a project, you can detain more water, you can retain it, you can keep it in a reservoir. There's lots of ways to solve the problem.
See, but that's a good news that you're just telling me that the insurance is going to be capped at 18% per year, right?
Yes, that is the current law, and it would take the Congress to change that law. And I don't think Congress has the aptitude to do that to existing homeowners.
Which is very different to tell a home buyer, oh, your insurance is going to quadruple, which is what the news are telling.
Well, here's what you don't know. And here's the gray area of the law. If you're not in a floodplain and you pay X and all of a sudden you're in a floodplain, you're going to pay what the new floodplain rate is, not the non-floodplain rate. And so the rates, while they are capped at 18% for existing policy owners, not if your situation change, that's the insurance itself. But when the base flood elevation changes and you're 5 feet below when you think you're 1 feet above, there's a gray area. I don't know how that's going to work. I'm just telling you the way it is not intended for existing policy owners in the same situations for their rates to escalate.
I have another question.
But as the maps change and now you think you're in Puerto Rico, but all of a sudden you're in the Bahamas, you're going to have to pay the Bahamas income tax rate, not the Puerto Rican income tax rate, because you're not where you thought you were. Yes, Jim?
Yeah. So going back to Dewberry, in order to make that house out of the flood zone, how much taller does the first floor have to be?
We'd have to, it looked like it was going to be significantly higher, right? I mean, I don't know. Here we can calculate. You go back to Dewberry. So Dewberry is currently at 65, and Dewberry needs to be, I think we can probably, shoot.
It was 61.7, Bill, not 60.
That was the garage, that wasn't the first floor, that was the garage.
I think the house was at 65, and so you add 2 to that. Is that right? It was just under the whatever.
You add whatever the base flood elevation was. The house was at 65, but what's the base flood elevation?
The new base
62. Yeah.
5.21 plus the 2 for the city is 67.21.
Yes, yeah. So 67. Yeah. So 67.21 from 65. So 2 feet 3 inches. Or more than 2 feet.
So Bill, can I ask a question also about Dewberry?
Mm-hmm.
So we gather all this information, present it to, our buyer customer that wants to purchase this house.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're purchasing the house, their insurance rates are not going to be grandfathered. They're going to be starting over with the new rates.
Correct.
So we're just presenting the information
presenting the information. We sell houses.
And they make decision about whether they want to, go forward and take all the risks and the increased costs and all that.
Absolutely. We don't want to, we are in the game of selling houses. We're going to sell all these houses over here along TC Jester. It's a beautiful area. It's close to hike and bike trails. It's great schools. Now, so long as they know the risk, it's like, they're at risk of lightning, they're at risk of flooding, they're at risk of crime. There's a certain amount of risk. I just need them to understand the risk. But I do think we can say, I would not buy that house.
You would say that?
I would.
Okay.
That's my opinion. Because I believe that there's a house like Dewberry that's right over here that isn't going to face that same problem. Right. And when this guy insurance is 4 times higher than this guy's going to be a lot more attractive.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just
And
trying
the
to
reason I would say that, and here's
the
what
nuances.
I would say, because the city, if it burned down, the city wouldn't let you build it there. That's
Right.
a pretty good indication that it's not high enough. Why did the city create that code? They created that code because FEMA told us that's what you need to do.
Right.
We were told by the government, this is how you're going to get houses out of harm's way and keep the flood insurance program affordable. They didn't do it because they wanted to, for God's sake. They're just not that good. They did it because they really didn't have a choice.
Right.
So all of us could afford flood insurance, and the houses that remain can afford flood insurance. The others are not going to be able to afford flood insurance, and you're going to tear them down, or you're going to raise them up.
Yeah.
Many of them you're going to tear down, you know.
Okay.
So Bill,
thank you.
Yep.
How do you get this information without an elevation certificate for your client?
Well, you need an elevation certificate. I just think anyone anywhere remotely in the 100, in the 100, if you have a mortgage, you're going to have it. And the people who are in the 500 are going to have it very soon. I think many of them are going to be calling you to get an elevation certificate 6 months from now, when we could have gotten the damn thing very easily in the last year. So that's what I'm saying. It's just so much easier to get it now. But yeah, there are people, there's going to be a flood of people. If you try to get an elevation certificate, the price ranges from $500 to $1,500. If there's huge demand for elevation certificates as the insurance program goes, then the cost of an elevation certificate is going to go to $2,500, and you're going to have to wait a month or two, and you might be paying higher insurance. But yeah, I think everyone, for sure, because you need the elevation certificate if anything happens to any of these houses in the 100 and the 500. This is what you don't understand. Your air conditioner goes out on Friday night. It's sitting on the ground. The AC guy needs to put it at the 500 base flood elevation +2. None of us know where the hell that is. I don't know if that's at 3 feet off the ground or 5 feet off the ground or 7 feet off the ground. You're going to need to do that. And when they don't do it, everyone's soon going to get this little notice about your air conditioning units. When your air conditioning units are going to be on the ground and your house is in the 100 and the 500, and your insurance goes up because your AC units aren't raised, and your insurance goes up $2,000 a year, you're going to have an incentive to raise the air conditioning unit. And of course the insurance company is going to do this. Guys, it's called a risk analysis. You know what the highest risk is? Your AC unit flood. It ain't even your house. So you know what you're going to do is and so the code is raise the damn AC units to 500 +2. Where is that? That's not even just getting an insurance quote. You may not even have flood insurance if you're in the 500, although you should. That's just getting a new air conditioning unit. Wouldn't you want to know how high it has to be? And the cost of AC work is going to be higher if it's 7 feet up in the air than when it's on the ground. And you got the cost of that metal thing to put it up there. And some of them are going to go on the roof because they don't fit in 3 feet. And you're going to get sued by your neighbor when the sound of it is raised 7 feet over the fence and it's next to his kitchen window. There's lots of issues here. The easiest way around that is get the elevation certificate and figure out where those things are. These generators are the same deal. They're not going to be on the ground anymore. They're too high at risk. So back to this elevation, it's telling you where the equipment is. It's telling you the machinery here. They raise those air conditioning units. This is it. This is the AC unit. They didn't put it on the ground. They put it at 65 feet. They were off by a couple of inches, but still, it's too low. And what happens when the air conditioning units are going to be, the insurance program's changing, okay? They're risk averse. We're not going to cover your AC units for an insurance claim if you didn't get them above what is the building code, which is 2 feet above the 500-year base flood elevation. And all these are heading down the path. What you need to know is, tell them that, I mean, I don't want to scare people. I just want to tell them the truth. Let me explain to you how the city building code is today. And you cannot build this house at 65 feet. You'd have to be 2 feet higher than this.
So Bill, on the flip side of this Dewberry property, if we're listing it, we get the same information
for the seller so that the seller knows.
For the seller.
You don't have to tell the buyer. You don't represent the buyer.
Right. So even though it's a material fact about the property.
I mean, you just tell them what you know. You can't, because we're not in the game of discouraging people, or we can't adversely impact the sale of our seller's home. And I know this is a fine line. And I know sometimes we get, now if you represent the buyer, you can tell the buyer anything that you want to know. But if you represent the seller, you don't have an obligation to tell them insurance programs changing October 1, maps are changing October 23rd. That's the difference between a good real estate agent and a bad real estate agent.
So then how do you have the conversation about how you price that property? And maybe we need to take this offline because I'm like way behind everybody else.
It ain't no secret. I have 4022 Merrick. It got 1 inch of water. It's in the 100-year floodplain. I am thoroughly convinced that the insurance for that house is going to be significantly higher. I am personally thoroughly convinced that there will be a number of tear down houses saturating the market in Braes Heights. I am thoroughly convinced, although I can't tell the public that the value of those houses will soon be significantly less as we increase the amount of supply when people get their insurance bills. So my people are selling quickly. Now, when I go to sell it, so we have a tenant, we're selling that house. I'm telling them, this house wants to be torn down. The insurance rate is going to be significantly higher than it is in the future, which is why we're selling it, to sell it down as a lot, just like what Jenny's buying a lot around the corner. And so long as they tear it down and they build higher, that's fine. But yeah, I mean, I would tell a buyer, A, I have to tell them that it flooded. B, we're already going to tell them that it's in the 100-year floodplain. And yeah, that isn't that long till we know that the flood insurance program's changing. Hell, the damn announcement's going to be made April 1. So it's not like I'm the only one that knows. I just paid attention to it more than the others. So yeah, we're selling this house in advance of other houses going on the market.
Oh, trust me, all your buyers' friends are going to call her and say, do not buy that lot, that lot floods and insurance is going to go up. Make sure that—
As long as you build a new house and it's more resilient, wouldn't you rather live in the new house high than in the one that might flood? I mean, that is a very desirable area. It has great schools, has a great library. It has Baker Ripley. It's easy access to the med center. It's on hike and bike trails. That's an extremely desirable lot.
Hey, Bill,
and there's not many lots for sale today. There's a lot of lots for sale after a flood.
Right.
It's been 3 years after the flood. There's fewer lots. Home building is booming. A lot of people want a new house. It's a perfect opportunity to sell that house. 2 years from now, when the insurance program and the maps are out and there's 100 more houses on that street for sale, the value of that dirt will be less. Now, the cost of construction could go up. The interest rates could go. I mean, so someone may save $100,000 on a lot a year from now. I don't know. I can't guarantee one way or the other, but they may pay just more for the cost of the borrowing the money and the construction costs. So it still may be a good time to pay $465 now than it is. And they're commodities. Don't sell. There'll be plenty of people in those houses that are over 65, that have over 65 exemption for taxes, and their insurance is going to be capped at 18%. They're just not going to sell theirs yet. They're going to wait 5 years till all the others sell, and they'll have the last 10% of the lots in Braes Heights, and they'll be very desirable. I mean, I'm selling a shit lot thing in River Oaks on Stanmore backing to San Felipe, 1.6 million for a lot. The same lot I'm selling on Merrick. Instead of 465, it's 1.6 million. You know what there are? Not many lots for sale in River Oaks. You know what determines the value of that lot? How many people want to buy a lot in River Oaks? I mean, it's a commodity. But yeah, I mean, it's the Dewberry is the fine line of what do you tell a buyer? You want to tell a buyer everything that I just told you. And we can't, I mean, I think you have to discuss it with the sellers and what is it that we're going to tell them. But you have to be able to answer the question. in anything. I mean, you got to be able to answer the question the way the seller why are you selling? Well, I lost my job and I can't afford the house. Is that what you're going to say? Or I really decided we want to move to the suburbs. Maybe I really want to decide to move to the suburbs because that's all I can afford, but I don't have to tell the people I lost my job and that's why I'm selling, or that I'm thinking about divorcing my wife. I'm saying, well, we want to change the scenery. Maybe it's in 2 different states. I mean, you have to figure out what you're really saying there. There's a way to say it that's not misleading and it is true, but you don't have to tell them.
Yeah, you don't want your buyers to know there's blood in the water.
Yeah. I mean, you might know that you're divorcing, or you might know that, something's happening, but you don't have to, and that's not misleading. That's the same thing Amanda Anhorn knows about it. So my clients are downsizing. I got plenty of clients that are downsizing because they just choose to downside. Maybe they don't want to pay $10,000 a month in a mortgage payment anymore, and they only want to pay $4,000. That's downsizing.
I have a question. You said 2 dates. You said October 1st and October 23rd. October 23rd, the new maps are coming out. What's October 1st?
October of 2023 for the maps.
2023.
For the maps, the insurance program, they will announce it April 1 and it will go into effect October 1. That's the insurance program. Okay. So that's just the change of the program. But you haven't updated all the maps yet. That's why we're still using the 500 as the 100 here in 2021 and 2022 until you get new maps, and then the city and county will modify their ordinances, because maybe you won't regulate the 500 the same way you rate the 100 once you get a new map. So you're not getting new map, but and that date on the maps is the final adoption. The maps are going to be out here in about 10 or 12 months. And there's just a long comment period. So it's not like it's the same thing I'm telling you about the insurance program before it starts. You're going to know what the new map is. It just isn't going to be, for regulatory purposes, in effect until October of 2023. But October of 2022, we're damn well going to know what every map is.
Okay.
There's going to be a flood of houses then that are now they're in the 100-year floodplain that they didn't know they were in the 100-year floodplain. The map's going to be out in advance. It's just like comment period of I-45. You can comment all day long, but they're building I-45. There ain't no way they're not building I-45. We just been talking about it for 3 years.
Okay.
Hey, Bill, I have a question. Are we restricted from advertising towards this subject? Like going out and trying to find clients?
So this is why absolutely you're not. I would advertise about it, which is why, I would be careful what I say. So the most thing is material facts. If Dewberry were torn down, it burned down today accidentally in a fire, you could not rebuild it back at that deal. That to be the case. We have a chart that shows it. It shows you in the 100 and the 500, you have to be at 500 plus 2. We know the city regulates the 500. The county regulates the 500. So you give them risk 2.0 website, which is the federal website. You give them the Harris County Flood Control District website that shows you the timeline of the maps. I'm just getting this directly from a source. I'm sourcing the Harris County Flood Control District. I'm sourcing FEMA. I can give you the New York Times article, which just tells you everything that I said and let people read it and say, well, this is just information that's out there. This is public information. And that's what, so yes, does your realtor speak flood? Which is some of the things I promote. Can your realtor give you good advice about the 100 and 500? Can you read an elevation certificate? Do you understand building codes? Do you understand timeline changes? Absolutely, I would do all these sort of things. And there's tons of places to go, but like I'm saying we're going to talk about this more, but I get this stuff from some other source. So if I go here and we talk about just drainage requirements that are changing, and so we know these things are changing, and I'm going to talk about, but haven't all changed yet. But I get it from. Here's these detention requirements. And so you go to this vote of the Sorry, I'm not as good at moving the stuff around as other people. But I go to the vote of county commissioners, which was 100% Republican and Democrats, telling you all, so here it is, it's passed May 12th of 2020, all cities that are in Harris County. If you want any of that $20 billion we talked about, you must adopt the finished floor elevation of habitable in the 500 elevation effective to that 2-year plus. So you're regulating the 100 and the 500 in across the city and the county, and you're going to 500 plus 2 feet. In Bel Air has to do this in order to get any money from the federal government to be spent on flooding. So I mean, we're talking about no net fill, even we didn't have it in the 100, now you have it in the 500. This was a requirement that this county put on place of the cities in order to qualify. If you get any benefits from the bond program, you must adopt these rules, and you must adopt them by December 31st of 2020. So, I mean, it's not like I'm making this stuff up. I'm telling you, it's right there for the world to see. This is how it works. So yeah, I mean, there's a fine line. You know, I send every seller those 3 links that we talked about last week. I send every seller Risk 2.0's website. I send every seller the Harris County Flood Control timeline on flood maps. I have the 80 slides I often give to my own clients or whatever. That can be a little overwhelming. And then I send them the New York Times article, those same 3 things. There's no seller that I have that I don't send that to. And I have no buyer that I don't send it to. But I speak thoroughly about future flood insurance risk. It's not even the risk of flooding, because I'm not as worried about flooding as I am the impact of insurance. And what I know is that the impact of insurance is going to be significantly different in the near future than what it's been in the past. And I know that from the federal government, the state government, the local government, every politician, and common sense. Just makes sense that higher risk properties should pay higher amounts. And that would, and the intention, and that article, then people know the risk. If the insurance is $12,000, they know the risk. Okay, so you're paying your fair share, and you know the risk. This is one way the government can, instead of relying on Jim to tell them, you know what they're going to rely on? A large insurance policy premium, because then people are going to know, and then they're going to decide, is it worth the risk, or do I remove the risk by eliminating that house and getting it out of harm's way, which then the insurance would be cheaper. And it's by saying if every insurance premium was $400, we just buy a house knowing that it floods because we're only paying $400. You know, if the insurance is higher, that the risk is higher.
Bill, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So why are we the only ones that are taking responsibility for this? Why aren't insurance agents learning about this? And when we say immediately call your insurance agent, talk through all the possibilities of insurance, why aren't they having some responsibility to alert these people, our clients, or not these people?
I don't think that they know, because they're not. So this same insurance agent isn't well versed on rules of the ordinances of the city permitting department, or the public works department, or the floodplain management office, or they don't know. They really don't know the impact to the property owner from just the permitting and ordinance perspective. B, they don't want to scare their people. They'd rather sell them an insurance. I'm just telling you what I knew to be true from my experience. They'd rather get them under insurance for $497, because then they're a client and they'll be able to sell them $5,000 worth of insurance next year, because they're going to be required to have the damn $5,000 insurance, than it is to not sell any insurance at all. Okay. They'd rather bait you, get you into the premium program, and deal with it in the future. It has evolved over time. It has already been delayed 1 year. Theoretically, it could be, I mean, until it's implemented, it could be delayed again. I don't have any indication that it's going to. The main reason, I'm just now probably being more political, is if you're a president that's major holdings are in real estate, you never want to caused the cost of real estate to go up. And so you had a president that was less inclined to change the rate. If you have a more liberally minded person that's trying to protect the mass amount of people, then this is the way to do it. So I think you have a better chance in the Biden administration of it all the way going through than you did in the Trump administration. That's probably more political than you want to know, but I think it's just the delay. I mean, we're worried about the cost of inflation, and one of these costs is just insurance program has lost billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars. And now we know those costs are just going to go up. It wasn't just Sandy Hook was not whatever that, it's going to flood in New Jersey. It's going to flood in Virginia. It's going to flood in Florida. We're going to have more wildfires. We're going to flood the Mississippi River in Indiana. And so the cost of these things for FEMA is exorbitant, so that you're having to change the program. You're always going to have natural disasters. You're always going to need the Red Cross and some water and blankets and generators and stuff. But you've got to find some way to pay for it, and modifying the flood insurance program. And look, we've artificially encouraged people to build in high-risk areas. You have. And if coastal properties, it's proven time and time and time again. You know who buys on the coast? Rich people. You know what they're willing to do? Take the risk. You know what? It doesn't really matter. If I have $30 million and I lose my $1 million house in Pirates Beach, nobody cares. Nobody feels sorry for me. It's just not that big a deal. It was no different from my winery burning in Napa Valley. We're probably not going to feel sorry for those people, right? You feel sorry for the schmuck who's living over here in his $400,000 house in Woodbrook, and his life savings tied up in the first house they ever bought, and then it floods and their life is ruined and they lost a bunch of money, and the additional cost of $212,000 when their house payment was already a struggle to begin with is more. You're hurting the disenfranchised people more than you are the wealthy people. When insurance is extremely high, they just do it anyway. They don't, they take the risk. And my father-in-law was very wealthy, had a beach house, never had insurance. You know what he said? I'm willing to assume the risk. That's my risk. If it burns down or blows down, I'll live with it. That's my risk. I'm rich. I'll deal with it. I'm self-insured. That's fine if you take that risk. I would think every house on the beach in America is subject to a hurricane. And I just can't imagine how you would not think it's not subject to a hurricane. Surely you think there's going to be another hurricane in your lifetime, and you're willing to assume the risk. Some people pay insurance for the risk and some people don't. But Cheryl, I do think that insurance companies are less hesitant than we are. They don't understand how it impacts the value of real estate. They're not in the supply and demand game of real estate. They don't understand the building code. They don't understand how substantial completion, substantial damage, all those sort of things are all new to this area. I think they're going to be forced to explain some of this, but they're not apt to do it until it's done. It's kind of, and the same was true of the Affordable Care Act. They really didn't know what to say until it was totally adopted, and because it was a moving target. So they can basically only explain what you've got and not what you're getting. But I think you can see it. I didn't make any of this stuff up. You can see exactly what's happening there. I just am passionate about it. I spent 117 days in hurricane relief, seeing the people that were most vulnerable who lost everything. And I don't want that to happen. And I have sold houses that flood. You know what I don't want to ever do again? Sell a house that floods. It is a shit feeling. It is really, really shit feeling to know that you sold someone an $800,000 house and they got 4 feet of water in a hurricane. And it can be devastating to our people. So I want to do the best I can. I want to educate you. I'm responsible for you. So you're my first charge. And then I'd like more of our industry to know this. But it's a complicated topic. It is complicated. It is hard to get in. Believe me, it's complicated.
So Bill, last week we had talked a little bit about drainage and the changes in the codes.
Mm-hmm. And I just didn't want to confuse that with this. So we're
exactly.
And that now is March 31st that those rules go into play. And so I am still going to do that. We had 3 or 4, Jenny selling a house in the floodplain, and Cynthia had this example, which is a bit. How did they get to build Dewberry, which finished in 2020? They were able to get their permits, and they could submit for permits prior to the 2018 date, and they were grandfathered. And yes, we shouldn't have probably let them do it, but you've got to have some transition. And the 2018 houses are just finishing. And remember, I talked much of Shady Acres and Spring Valley and Spring Branch. I think we permitted thousands of houses the day before the rule kicked in, so that people could build at 100 plus 1. And the new rule's 500 plus 2. The average across the city was 3.5 feet if you're in the floodplain, the difference. I'm nervous to sell any of those houses. They just were in a hurry to meet a minimum threshold that most of us knew were changing. But it was not illegal to do that.
But it's still kind of shocking.
It's very shocking to me. But it's
not to be too altruistic, but I mean, come on.
Plenty of, it's cheaper to build a 18-inch slab than it is a 4.5-foot raised pier and beam structure. It just is. So if you're a big developer and every $10,000 of every house ends up building 500 houses, I mean, I get why they do it. Don't agree with it, but I get it. I think there's going to be homeowners that are going to be in trouble because of it.
Yeah, Bill, I have a question.
Yep.
And it's just kind of related, but not really. But the house over on 15th and a half is in the floodplain.
Yep.
The inspection went well yesterday, but there is a sump pump in the backyard.
And my Balin house has a sump pump. I put sump pumps all the time, and I didn't reply to you. And air conditioning, my sump pumps were managed and regulated by my air conditioning company. I had them install them. So, we can get you the name of some people. A pier and beam house, many houses I have sump pumps, which can be a very good thing. They collect water and they pump it from one place to another so that it does not remain A, underneath the house, or B, anywhere. I had when I built my wine cellar, I put 2 sump pumps around in the perimeter, created a space 2 feet by 3 feet, put in the drains, surrounded it by rocks. The water goes down the grass and down 2 feet of dirt into the rocky area. I didn't want any pressure on my basement so that it popped up the basement. So when the water fills up, the bobber fills up in the sump pump, and then it fills up and it shoots the water to Morrison. And you can go see on the side of Morrison by my old garage, you'd see 2 PVC pipes where the water shoots out of when the pressure gets high. And very, very common. Power goes out, those things don't work unless you have a generator. But many people, we used to, this houses that are low to the ground, we would say, all right, dig a hole in the middle, push the water to the middle of the house, put in a sump pump, the water collects underneath the middle of the house, and you shoot the water someplace else. It was very common for time. Now we've decided that the sump pumps fail all the time. The water collects there. It doesn't quite get to the drain. The drain fills up with leaves or rodents or rats or insulation. And so they can, it's not uncommon to be there. I'm not saying that's the best way to deal with drainage. I personally think making sure the water never gets there in the first place is a better way on a pier and beam house that's low to the ground, or maybe not even low to the ground. But they're not uncommon. They are common.
I love my sump pump.
Yeah,
my sump pump is arranged so that no water goes under the house, but then the water from the yard, where's it going to go? Into the sump pump.
Well, and that's exactly how I designed Balin. Mine was designed, the perimeter of the house where I was worried about the water getting under the porch. And so it's from the edge of the house. That's where the sump pump is.
Yeah.
My water didn't get under the house either, but sump pumps can work very well. They're very, very common.
Mine's about 15 feet away from the house, but as long as the pipes are run correctly, it's great.
Yeah.
Has a little grate over it so nobody falls in the square hole,
And remember, every basement house in Indianapolis, Brooklyn, they all have sump pumps there. They're very common in the world. We're just not as used to them, but they literally, they are pretty common. You'd be surprised. And they are a good fix for houses that are low to the ground. And they are a good fix when the back of your yard is lower than the front of your yard. There are certain occasions, all you're doing is collecting this water, somewhere and shooting it someplace else. They do have to be maintained.
And Frank can give me the name of somebody who can
Yes.
look at that. Okay, thank
Yes.
you.
Yep.
I have a real simple question.
Sure.
When you're selling a cleared lot, it's not a elevation certificate you're asking. What you're asking is to have the BF, the 500-year base flood elevation listed on the survey, right?
That's correct. Yep.
It's not an elevation certificate.
You can get
'cause
an
there's
elevation
nothing-
certificate. I mean, I have an elevation certificate for my empty lot over there. I
Oh.
managed to get an instead of putting it on the survey, I just got an elevation certificate. But for the city regulatory purposes, the 500 on the survey is perfectly acceptable, which is what we would typically get, you know, especially outside of the 100-year floodplain. Instead of just spending the money on an elevation certificate, although I might get the elevation certificate in the 100 and the 500 now, but I would definitely get the 500-year base flood elevation on the survey. I would get that everywhere, because areas that are not in the floodplain may soon be in a floodplain. Why not just have the information?
I asked for that on a survey for a lot out memorial that I just sold, and they didn't put it on there, and they're making a big deal about going back. So, but I asked them, I mean, exactly.
They don't have to
like
go
you taught
back.
me to ask.
If you have the 100, you can calculate the 500. It's not you're not measuring something that's there. You're measuring the hypothetical deal. If this happens, where is it? So you're just
she wants us there at 11:25.
So yeah, I mean, they shouldn't have to go back. It's just purely a function. If you can measure the 100, Maria, can you turn off your,
what?
Can you mute for, okay. Yeah, so if you have ever measured anywhere, you can measure the other. The 1,000-year floodplain, the 500-year floodplain, the 10% floodplain, it's just a function of measurement. They don't have to go back for anything. And they're lazy. But yeah, I would get it on the survey if I was in the 100 or the 500. What else would we like to talk about today? Interest rates, and we probably ought to talk about interest rates, and then I probably ought to make a better presentation because you're probably running out of time. I mean, interest rates have been at historic lows, and interest rates are basically tied to how poor the economy works. So when when the coronavirus hit and a pandemic hit, and you close every restaurant around the country and bowling alleys and movie theaters and gyms, and of course the economy was going to go to hell from that deal. And so federal interest rates were at 0, and secondary interest rates tackle onto that to some degree or whatever. There's a concern that there is inflation, when in fact for the quarters 2 and 3, which you would imagine the worst of the pandemic euphoria, March, April, May, June, July, and December, the cost of things went down. I mean, the cost went down. They went down because of panic and any number of reasons. Immediately, you could see by the fourth quarter, the cost of things are up. And we discussed this in our deal about supply and demand. You would think in the middle of a pandemic or oil being bad that the cost of a steak dinner would go down, but in fact it's more expensive today for a steak dinner than it was 6 months ago. Most restaurants themselves on general have added a 20% COVID fee, you know, just in order to pay for their employees and things. So the supply chains have been choked. You couldn't import all the shit from China when Wuhan was in the paper every day. You can imagine there were a fair number of restrictions there, and factories shut down. The factory for the windows, the factory for the faucet, the factory for everything but toilet paper and masks shut down, which caused the supply deal, which would cause then, if there's fewer amount of supply and there's demand, the cost goes up. So we're seeing an uptick in certain cost today. Now, soon the economy is going to be back open. I believe we all can see that there's some light at the end of the tunnel. Don't think it's over today. Don't think we're removing our masks today or anything. But I mean, you're going to open up more factories, and it's a commodity. If the cost of milk is usually $5 and it goes to $8, you know what happens? More people start to produce milk. It's the same with oil. And the costs go up incrementally, and then of course they go back down. Interest rates are about the same, okay? They're tied to these things. Fear of rising inflation causes people to think that the interest rates need to go up, and they did in fact go up over the last week because the economic news was positive, not negative, for a little bit, leading people to think that we're going to be on a boom. We are not in a boom. We are not close to some boom. We may have some boom in the future. We may recover at some point, but we're not in a boom. We're just not as bad as we were, or maybe not as bad as people thought it would be. So really smart people like the chairman of the Federal Reserve and everything is telling you, the federal rate is going to be at 0 all of 2021. The feds are not raising interest rates, because if you raise interest rates, the cost of money goes up. So interest rates are going up. They're not going to, I think they have been, as we were past the peak of the pandemic and the problems tied to the pandemic. So instead of being at 2.65 or 2.75, where we were 6 or 8 months ago, which were artificially low because we were in the middle of a pandemic, okay, you're no longer in the same part of the pandemic. The economy is better. You're able to fly, just try to go to Disney World or try to go to Tulum. The cost of Tulum is twice of what it was when I went last June. The exact same hotel room is twice. The exact same airfare is more, because you know what? People have pent up demand and they want to go to Tulum. They didn't want to go to Tulum when I went in June. So interest rates are up, and they will go up from 2.75, and I think we need to think that 3% is probably a very good interest rate. And they probably will by the time we get to December of 2021, which is going to be a better December than 2020. So sales tax revenues are going to be up, employment is going to be up. There's going to be any number of factors which we're going to be higher, which means I believe what you're going to see is 3% interest rates here for the next 3 to 4 months. Then you're going to see 3.2 interest rates by the end of the year, and you're going to see about 3.5% interest rate a year from now, which is still a historic low. Okay, by far they're historic lows. It's a little frustrating if you wanted to lock in at 2.65 and you can't lock in at 2.65. I understand the frustration there. I wouldn't lock an interest rate today unless I was closing tomorrow. I'm telling you, I would wait another week. I believe they're going to go back down. Almost every lender believes they're going to go back down a little bit. They were artificially inflated or whatever there. But I do think we need to be aware that rates are rising. And so when rates start to rise, exactly what's happening, everyone will get off of the fence. If you're thinking about buying, and you're thinking about buying $1.5 million house, you're gonna put $500,000 down, you're gonna finance $1 million. The difference between 2.75 and 3.25 is $450. And that's, 3 steak dinners and 2 bottles of wine for some people. And they're gonna say, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and just buy. And you're seeing that. You're seeing people buying today that were thinking about buying in June will buy in a hurry, because the cost of the money, the interest rate, will go up, which means, they either get less of a house or a higher payment. Most people can't choose the higher payment, so they buy the cheaper house. We saw this all of 2021, all of 2020. They bought the $1.25 million house because interest rates were 2.75, where they would have just bought the $1 million house, but they could afford a more expensive house because the interest rates were lower. So you're going to see the push downward versus upward because of the fear of rising interest rate. Now, I will tell you, certain costs are going up fairly significantly. Building costs are one of those things. You got fires in California, which means we got less wood to harvest. You're not importing as much wood from as many places. It's not easy to send you can't even get into Canada today, folks. That's where the majority of the wood is. They don't even let Americans in, So there's a number of factors which have caused that supply chain for the next period of time to be off. Frank and I needed a washing machine for a rental unit that we manage, and to get a washing machine's 3 and 4 weeks many of the times. We need a dishwasher for this house we're selling across the street from Rose, and it's 8.5 weeks out for a panel ready dishwasher. You know what? They don't have any panel ready dishwashers in Texas today, and it's just, you either wait for them or pay more, or pay some way to get it there. So I just want to talk about it. You have to be able to discuss interest rates and stay up to date with these interest rates. And I don't think they're rapidly rising, unsustainable. I just think we need to think that 3 and 3.5 is a damn good interest rate for 2021. Questions about interest rates?
NAR indicated that I think their quotes were somewhere between 3.1 to 3.3.
Yeah.
And actually there was NAR, and I think it was another realtor, or actually take about one of the mortgage, overall national mortgage organizations were both saying somewhere between 3 and 3.1 with maybe a high of 3.3.
There's another great article in the Times today. I mean, and I'm liberal Democrat. I believe they have learned lessons over time. We have thrown more money in the shortest amount of time in the history of mankind. You're talking about in the New Deal, in the heart of the Depression, spending 4% of the gross national product or something for everything. Social Security, Medicare, bridges, the WPA. You're talking about spending 26% in 2021. When Obama was elected, we had to fight tooth and nail to get $800 billion to get us out of the worst recession since the Great Depression. And you're talking about spending $10 trillion in half the time Obama did it in his first term, which I think is better than letting every small business struggle for 5 years and every home and owner in America to struggle and every tenant to I get the reason you'd want to do it. I think you're going to have a quicker recovery because I think we're going to have a quicker recovery. And I think you pass a stimulus bill next week, it's going to cause additional pressure on interest rates because they're going to think you're going to have a quicker recovery. You know what's better for America? A quicker recovery. It ain't great if 12% of the population is unemployed. I want to get back to 4% unemployment. And so I think interest rates are going to bounce a little because there is going to be, you pass another $1.9 trillion stimulus, people get nervous that that's going to cause the economy to roar. I don't know about roaring anymore, but I do think it's an upward trajectory, which is certainly better than a downward trajectory with low interest rates. I can't imagine that I want a bad economy and low interest rates. I'll take a good economy and 3.25 interest rates all day long. I'm happy to pay for $3 gas and $75 oil a barrel because I'm telling you, you will also have a lot more houses if oil's at $70 a barrel than you will when it's $50 a barrel in Houston, Texas. You stand to reap the benefit of all of it. But yeah, I think they're artificially high right this second, especially jumbo loans. I think if I was closing in 45 days, I'd just wait a week or two and see if they don't settle back down a little bit, which they already are settling back down. Cindy, on interest rates, because you're new, you can't lock an interest rate until you're under contract. So your client there, they won't let him lock a rate today. He has to be under contract to get a rate. So when you get a rate, there's a monthly forecast of when dates come out. Unemployment comes out this day, housing starts this day, the trade deficit this day. And so we all just kind of watch these dates. And when you're anticipating something bad, like maybe the trade deficit, then you lock on one of those dates. So they announce, it's a published schedule of these dates that most of us know to kind of look at and say, all right, don't lock yet, lock here. How do you think it's going to be? Well, if we have a third wave and more unemployment next month, the damn interest rates are going to go way back down again because that's what they do. They follow economic news. You just need something negative, and there's plenty of negative things out there. Okay, anyone else want to talk about anything today? I don't think I'm able to do Thursday, sorry. I'm getting my vaccine shot at 10:45 on Thursday. So I'll be in line somewhere. So that's what I'm doing on Thursday.
Oh, that's great. You're getting that.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. I just had that one question, but we can talk offline if you want.
Oh no, what is it again? Tell me the topic again.
Do you ever have two different brokerages representing one property? Like how often does that?
Yes.
Just a single family home in Houston, two brokerages. Does that even work?
Very rare. I mean, it's not common. Most people don't want to go to that effort or whatever. It wouldn't be uncommon to list the penthouse at the Huntington with you and a non-exclusive listing, because they're going to list with Sotheby's in Manhattan for that also. Farm and Ranch might be the same way. They're going to let you market it, and they're going to let Farm and Ranch Specialist of Washington County LLC also market it. Not totally uncommon to do that. Most brokers don't want to do that. We are, it just depends on who brings the buyer. And, you know, so if you bring the buyer, you get paid. If they bring a buyer before you, you marketed it for nothing. I'm in this gig at 540 Heights Boulevard, which is 17,000 square foot something that doesn't really want to be a house. But I mean, their bank really wants them to co-list with a commercial broker, which I agreed to with Transwestern. So we're co-brokering it. Transwestern markets to the commercial side. I market to the Heights side. We're co-brokering, which means we're both we just take the listing, we're each making 50-50. That is slightly different from a non-exclusive listing, which you might be talking about, where you list with multiple brokers and see who catches a fish. We don't do that. I mean, Heights Boulevard, I'm probably willing to do that. I don't know that I'm gonna be able to represent the same number of commercial people that they are, but I do know historic districts and modifications and the walkability. So I know more than Transwestern knows about a lot of things, and not as enough about, because it's really been self-owned. There's not a rent roll, there's no cap rate, there's no, you know, so they're able to bring a level of expertise to that one deal that probably I'm willing to make 50% of something than 0 of something, you know. So that's an instance it might work. Like I say, we have some 26-month Carnivon on you know, over there. Maybe Sotheby's has the listing in Houston, but maybe they're marketing it in the UK, or maybe someone else is marketing it in Dubai, or, I mean, it wouldn't be uncommon for something like that to have more than one broker. It would be uncommon on Woodland Street or Euclid. You don't need 2 of the same people marketing it. That doesn't work.
Yeah, that didn't make sense
That isn't
to
gonna
me.
work. I mean, that isn't gonna work at all. That's not what we're talking about. But I didn't want to have a short answer that there's never an instance, because there might be some instance, but it's those atypical sort of things that we're talking about. And for you to do that, you have to have my permission. So we would talk about whether or not we were willing to do that or not. But we've marketed some properties in Cancun. Some of those islands, we're always marketing something on an island or something. It never really works out too much, but we have plenty of experience doing that sort of thing. And I'm, you know, I don't mind marketing. We are, you know, and for the international listings have often been that way. And so we're getting a new international MLS over the next few months. And it's very common. You show your listing agreement, you have to provide the listing agreement to, you know, to Nathan or Sean or whatever, but they know it's not an exclusive listing.
Right. Okay. All right. Yep. Thank you.
What else anyone want to talk about?
So Bill, do we have a specific, it's kind of on the same subject, a little bit different. Do we have a specific referral fee?
You know, our standard referral fee is 25%, you know, so if you're just doing a broker with, you know, someone's mother's in San Diego and they're referring their kid to us and they want a standard referral, our standard referral is about 25%. Now, big relocation companies, Cardis and all them, I mean, they're at 42.5 already, you know, so our, you know, and it's not like we never take them, especially if you sold them the house and, you know, here's our reigning thought. If you can sell it in 30 days, pay the 42.5%, and it's not that much deal. You get some of these relocation companies, you're giving a marketing report every week that's 9 pages. You're putting the utilities and paying everything in your name. I mean, they're hard sells to begin with. You could be out a whole hell of a lot, and it's never gonna, I mean, it's just not worth it. I mean, I already tell people, look, I'm getting a third, IRS is getting a third, and you're getting a third. When we give up more than the third, nobody's making any real money on this transaction, you know, but it's not like we never do them. It's especially something we already sold before. And if it has a high probability of selling in a reasonable time frame, yes. Same as the buyer side. You're always going to represent a buyer who's going to buy something in a relocation company. I mean, that's just the nature of the game, and their rules are different, but you're still getting your standard 3% most of the time in those deals. They could go to 2% if they feel like they can get away with it. That's what they'll offer. And they just haven't been able to offer that yet, but it's going to get more competitive.
But if you're just getting a referral from a broker in Austin or
our standard leverage deal that we have, yeah.
Okay.
So we have this leverage, which we have independent brokers like ourselves that are vetted across the world. And like you have a client that wants to go to Savannah, then yeah, you would just pull up our partner in Savannah, call them, talk it through, and our standard deal is, I mean, it's all negotiable, but you know, you want 20 and you want to pay 20 and you want to get 30, and we settle at about 25% when there's not a lot of shit factored. That deal's nothing. They send over a form, we sign it, it's one page. You're not sending them 5 broker market analysis. I don't keep them up to date all the time. I mean, you're just paying them at the end. 25% is the standard referral for brokerages like ourselves.
Thank you.
That's what a Sotheby's agent would pay another Sotheby's agent.
Yeah.
You know, that's what
yeah,
that's what a Compass agent would pay a Compass agent. Did y'all like my post on Facebook last night after I'd had my glass of wine or whatever? But I mean, I can grow market share too. If I could lose $270 million in a quarter, I could grow my business just fine. We just don't have the luxury of having SoftBank fund us $270 million that we can lose. And I think the only reason they're losing $270 million is they're trying to put you and me out of business. And they'll keep losing $270 million as long as the world lets them do it. But I want the consumers to know that these large companies like that are trying to put out small, locally owned, Houston-owned businesses any way they can, and they will be manipulated and controlled by Wall Street and Chinese investors that own 38.6% of that company already, foreign-owned people. But it isn't even Robert Redkin or whatever who owns 2% of the company. It's foreign investors whose goal is to put other people out of business. That's how you gain market share. You know, that's when Walmart went in and outsold all the people, then that's why you didn't have anyone in downtown middle America anymore. They couldn't compete with that. So it's just when people choose a Compass of the world, they're choosing to send much of their proceeds out of Houston, Texas, and someplace else. Instead of it, I'm not saying Compass doesn't do good things or the people that work for Compass aren't good people. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, look at the model. The model is to put us out of business. And people should think twice about who they do business with if they want more than one choice. Okay, that was my soapbox for today on that. So everyone have a great day. I'm around all afternoon if you need anything. We'll talk again soon. Have a great day.